Simply Christianity, Chapter 7, Forgiveness on Offer. For me, the most significant aspect of Jesus' authority as the Christ was not his teaching, as striking as this was, nor his healings, as amazing as those were, but his claim to have the authority to hand out God's forgiveness to whomever he wanted. On one occasion, he chose to emphasize this point in a way he knew would land himself in trouble with the religious leaders of his day, though he seemed not to worry too much about upsetting religious leaders. One day, Jesus was teaching, and some Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there. They had come from all the towns of Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was with him to heal. Some men arrived carrying a paralyzed man on a stretcher. They were trying to bring him in to put him before Jesus, but because of the crowd, they could find no way through. They went up on the roof of the house and lowered him down on his stretcher through the tiles right into their midst in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." The scribes and Pharisees began to think to themselves, "Who is this who speaks such blasphemies? Who is able to forgive sins except God alone?" That's Luke chapter 5, verses 17 through to 21. The amazing thing about this episode is not the adventurous way these friends got Jesus' attention, though Jesus does appear to be impressed. It's not even that Jesus went on to heal the disabled man. The truly incredible thing about this is that Jesus publicly claimed to be able to forgive people for the things they had done to offend God himself. Their sins. This is an extraordinary claim. Imagine I stole your car, then, feeling guilty about it, decided to return the vehicle to one of your friends who promptly announced, "That's okay, I forgive you." How would you react? Surely you'd feel upset and a little cheated, not only by me for stealing the car, but also by your friend for presuming to be able to forgive me on your behalf. No one has the right to hand out your forgiveness but you alone. Surely it would be the same with God. How on earth could a mere mortal presume to forgive another human being for the things they had done to offend the Almighty? The religious leaders there that day, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, picked up on this point and thought to themselves, "Who is this who speaks such blasphemies? Who is able to forgive sins except God alone?" They reasoned that Jesus' claim to be able to forgive this man was tantamount to claiming God's authority for himself. Technically, this is blasphemy, and in the culture of that day, as with some cultures today, blasphemy is punishable by death. At this point, Jesus could easily have qualified his statement by explaining that all he meant to say was, "I tell you that God forgives your sins." But far from backtracking, Jesus takes the opportunity to emphasize publicly that God had in fact authorized him, as the Christ, to offer forgiveness to anyone he chose. The story continues. But Jesus realized what they were thinking and answered them, "Why do you think this way in your hearts? Which is easier, to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up and walk'? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralyzed man, "I tell you, get up and pick up your stretcher and go back to your home." And immediately he got up right there in front of them, picked up what he was lying on and went back to his home, giving honor and praise to God. Everyone was stunned and honored God. They were quite afraid and said, "We have seen extraordinary things today." Luke chapter 5, verses 22 to 26. In some ways, the healing of the disabled man was incidental, although I'm sure it was a delight for the man himself. On this occasion, the healing was more than just an act of kindness on the part of Christ. It was a visible sign that Jesus could also do the invisible miracle of handing out God's forgiveness. That he could literally look men and women in the eye and say, "All that you've done to offend God, I here and now forgive," with all of God's authority. It is no wonder the crowd there that day was stunned and said to one another, "We have seen extraordinary things this day." Life can be very unforgiving at times. People with hurt can hold grudges against us to their deathbed. A small slip-up at work can mean the difference between a promotion and redundancy. An angry word can cause a divide between husbands and wives, or between parents and their children, that fails to resolve for years to come, if at all. Into just such a world, Jesus came and announced that despite the unforgiving nature of much of our society, God was in the business of offering people a clean slate, and he had authorized his Christ to publicize and make good that offer.